prayer in Hinduism is not, for example, the big mass worship of the Friday mosque in any Islamic observance, where you have literally hundreds, or depending on the community, thousands of people praying publicly at one time. And indeed, it is often noticed who in the community hasn't come to Friday prayers and who has come, and all of the stuff. There, the performance, as well as the actual visible public action, is hugely important. There is no equivalent for that in Hinduism. I have been to temples, but particularly in two phases of my life. When I was a child and I was going with my parents, and subsequently when I became a public figure and was going with my colleagues, party workers, as part of a social practice. I do that, but I also go to mosques and churches. In fact, every single Christmas Eve, with one exception for a family reason, I have been to Christmas Mass in 3 different Christian denominations for the last 9 years. So that becomes not a religious act, but if you like, to that degree a political act, but certainly one connoting respect and reverence. When I go to a Hindu temple, there's an additional difference. I'm also a Hindu, so I can't just go there as an observer. I go there very much as a participant, as somebody who will also pray, also give dakshina, also get a prasad. Some of my party workers pledge that in return for A, B or C, that I will be weighed against either bananas or sugar or coconuts or whatever in the temple, in the tulabharam practice. And of course, the equivalent of my weight will be donated to the temple. And to fulfill their pledges, I've had to go and do this also. Now, I've often asked myself, if the MP were a Christian or a Muslim, A, would they have made the pledge, or B, would he have played his part? I do consider Aurangzeb to be the most bigoted of the Mughal emperors. But I do quote his biographer, Audrey Trishka, as pointing out that he's not this kind of guy who just decimated temples, attacked Hindus and discriminated against them, as some of the Hindus have been saying, because the reality was more complex, that he destroyed some temples and he built and financed other temples, that he did discriminate against some Hindus, but he also promoted and rewarded Hindus and had Hindus in very senior positions in his court and in his military. So I've accepted all that and I pointed it out. I've said that the reality is always a little more complicated and more nuanced than the black and white images. I'm defending the rebel party when they're right this time. See, the problem with that party is, unfortunately, they're right part of the time, but their exaggerations and far-flung claims are so wrong that they discredit even the bits that are right. The reason Dr. Harshvardhan came under attack, wrongly, because what he said was right, was because he was making this claim at an Indian Science Congress in which the ruling party had pushed and blessed some of the most outlandish, ill-founded and unscientific assertions, such as that Pushpak Vimans were flying around. I mean, the entire Pushpak Viman theory is based on one fraudulent, forged document which has been discredited in the 1920s. Of course, it is true that India was the country where plastic surgery was first performed. Indeed, the first recorded rhinoplasty in the world was done by Shushruta. But the truth is, to say that Ganesha's head is evidence of plastic surgery, by using that as the basis for your argument about plastic surgery, you're making a whole lot of people disbelieve plastic surgery was ever done in India, though in fact it was. So why don't you stick to the facts and you'll have a good story? Well, no, this fascism thing, frankly, I leave it to the Marxists to have their little battles. To my mind, labels are much less useful than understanding the specific conduct of a particular political actor and standing up against what is wrong. There's a lot we can attack them for. To do so does not require the label fascist. Now, fascism was indeed a phenomenon of a particular period of 20th century history, and I must admit that the fascism that we have been reading about, hearing about, talking about is indeed a fascism which cost a terrible, terrible price in human lives in Europe in the 1920s and 30s. I don't think we've seen anything comparable in India. We've had some bad cases, but we've not had anything like mass arrests, concentration camps, mass incarcerations, mass torture, elimination of an entire minority has happened under Hitler's Germany. None of that has happened. So let us see things proportionately. It's not that there is anything to admire in the policies of the government, but using a term of abuse, political abuse, should be founded on very specific and detailed factors. The Prime Minister and many of the top leaders of the BJP have hailed Deen Dayal Upadhyay as their ideological mentor and hero. Now, they've even asked certain government departments to study the writings and thoughts of Upadhyay. One of the key things he stands for is completely contradictory to what the government claims. The Prime Minister tells us the Constitution is his holy book. Mr. Upadhyay has completely rejected the Constitution. He says his fundamental critique is that the Constitution rests on a fundamentally false premise, which is that India, for which the Constitution is written, is a territory and all the people on it. Whereas he says, a nation is not a territory. A nation is therefore not a territory and all the people on it. A nation is a people, and the people of India are the Hindu people. This is such a fundamental difference of belief between the kind of constitution written by Dr. Ambedkar and his colleagues and the constitution that Deen Dayal Upadhyay would have written had he been around to do it, that it is impossible with any intellectual consistency and honesty to say on the one hand that the Constitution is my holy book, and on the other hand to say Deen Dayal Upadhyay is my hero. One or the other has to be repudiated. I'm not the kind of person who sneers at other people's intellectual abilities. It is indeed possible that what's lacking is intellectual capital. It's also entirely possible that there's some shrewd politics at work, that what they're doing is saying, look, let's ride out one term before we do anything that furthers our ideology in a direction that may create a lot of resistance. So for now, maybe they're just biding their time. Who knows?